probably one of the highlights of the harvest of 2025 is the yield of oilseed rape. We're looking at about somewhere an average of about 5 tonnes a hectare, which is probably one of the highest we've ever had. And couple that then on top of good prices for oilseed rape at the moment, or certainly at harvest time, it probably was the star performer for anybody who grew oilseed rape in 2025. So I suppose from that point of view, people were generally happy with oilseed rape the way it turned out.
Benchmarking is a great way to see how your farm's performance compares to others or to the national picture. It might not be a perfect comparison, but at least it's a good starting point. From there, you can look more closely at your sales, costs and margins, and the Teagasc Profit Monitor is an excellent tool to help with that. You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We'd really appreciate it if you could listen, follow and give us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. The Teagasc Harvest Report 2025 was published late last week, and I'm delighted today to be joined by its authors, Shay, Phelan and Ciarán Collins, both tillage specialists with Teagasc, to bring us through the details. Shay, if I want to start with you first, there's a lot of work goes into assembling that crop report. You might maybe step us through that.
There's a lot of people contribute to this. It's not, as you rightly say, it's not just myself and Ciarán plucking figures from around the country. So we get all our tillage advisors, and we get a lot of input from the industry as well. So people from north, south, east, and west. So I suppose thanks to everybody that contributes to it, I mean, it makes for a good report at the end of the season.
So Shay, summarise it for us. What the 2025 season, was it good? Did we produce more grain than we've produced before, or certainly I suppose it's better than 2023 and 2024? How did it shape up?
Yeah, I suppose if you look at the overall production, Michael, I suppose it's a return to what we would see as normal, where we're kind of up in that 2.2, 2.3, even 2.4 million tonnes. So at about 2.23 million tonnes, we're kind of, I suppose, where we'd like to be. And I suppose that's probably the big message from this year's harvest. We kind of got over two really bad years in 2023 and 2024. And this is a kind of return to a normal type harvest, if you like, in terms of yield. I suppose a couple of other things that kind of contribute to that, I suppose, is the fact that a lot more winter crops went back in. We're back to where we normally are in terms of area of winter cereals, and that contributed in no small way to the overall yield.
Any difficulties with that larger yield, Shay, in terms of storage or material coming in too fast into merchants?
Yes and no. I suppose the first thing, if we start back with winter barley, when the winter barley harvest it started probably about a week or 10 days earlier than you would normally expect, because of the drought we had in April and again in June or July. So there was probably some people, I know certainly in a couple of merchants I was involved or bringing grain into, they probably hadn't really set up for the harvest when it started. So there was a few teething issues, I suppose, around merchants' yards when the harvest started, because it did start that 10 days to maybe a fortnight earlier in some cases. But overall, I suppose there was probably a hangover of grain from last year, so that also contributed a bit to it as well.
I suppose with that in mind, Ciarán, there were higher yields. We returned pretty much to the amount of tons that we normally get in the country. However, though, margins are under serious pressure. What are the big factors behind that?
Yeah, look, it's a welcome return to and look, not exceptional yields, but look, a reasonably good harvest. And I think the dry weather is a big contributing factor to costs as well, in the sense that, look, we got to do things when we needed to do it. We didn't have replanting. And then, for the harvest and managing dry weather, there is a big value in that. But as you say, we're just not getting enough for our grain to cope with our increase in costs. Like, we saw a big increase in costs back now. We're going back nearly 4 seasons ago now, when we saw the big increase in fertilizer. Machinery, we know that's a big factor now. I was just looking at figures this morning, like in a crop winter wheat, and our cost and returns, albeit full contractor charges, but like machinery is a third of that cost. Like, it's very, very high. It's the biggest cost after fertilizer, following that at 28% and sprays then at 22%. So I suppose, look, the grain price, or what we get for our grain, isn't keeping pace with our costs. That's the short answer. I suppose the other one in terms of margins this year as well, our output from straw is lower than it would have been last year as well, and I suppose that's another factor as well, maybe just affecting profitability this year.
All contributing to that, yeah. Shay, on the crop report there, it says the winter cereals performed really, really well. Why was that in the year that was in it?
I think Ciarán highlighted it there, Michael, or in terms of we had a very benign autumn last autumn, so crops went in excellent conditions. There's probably some of the best conditions I certainly saw winter cereals being planted in. That's wheat, barley, and oats. A lot of crops got to be rolled, which is a rarity in a lot of years when you're trying to drill winter cereal crops. And I suppose the winter was very benign as well. We didn't have a whole lot of rain, so we didn't have a lot of crop losses, if you like, in terms of flooding and all that type of thing. So as guys used to say to me years ago, crops were, they were there from ditch to ditch. So there's no bare patches, and bare patches, as they used to say, don't yield. So from that point of view, we were dealing with full crops. So it gave the crops the best opportunity that they could to give us good yields.
And the season, I suppose, in the spring probably helped a lot too in that shade, did it?
Yeah, exactly that. Again, thinking of the spring this year, it was the weather was right at the right times. So for example, like when we were trying to spread the first nitrogen on, say, like some winter barley, trying to spray wheat, whatever it happened to be, the weather windows just happened to fall at the right time. So most, I'd say, if not all, inputs were put on at ideal timings through the spring. And I suppose one other thing that probably really did affect the crops' yields this year is that there was a lack of disease. There was very little levels of septoria in crops, very little ringcorn, net blotch, and barley, mildew, all those sorts of diseases. They were largely absent, with the exception probably of yellow rust in wheat, which did have an effect. But for the most part, from a disease point of view, it was a quite clean year. So it gave crops all the capacity to give yield.
And with that, Shay, it mentions that winter wheat had a very high yield of 10.55 tons per hectare. Was that one of the highest on records?
Yeah, it's. I think there's only looking back through CSO figures recently. I think there was only 3 years that were higher than that. 2015, 2022 were 11 tons per hectare. I think 2021 was 10.8 tons per hectare. So 10.55 tons per hectare this year is, as far as I can see, the fourth highest yield that we would have had, on top of recovering areas. So we had 60,000 hectares or thereabouts. So that contributed to producing almost a little over a 250,000 extra tons of wheat this year, winter wheat, compared to what we had last year. So, winter wheat did very, very well this year.
Just in the winter barley, Shay, the yields are an awful lot better after a few disappointing enough kind of years. The harvest was a good bit earlier. I suppose the winter barley was probably 10 days earlier than normal, with some very low moisture levels. Do you think that had an effect, and maybe the yields might have been even a bit better?
For sure, Michael. And I suppose it's one of the things that was noticeable about the harvest this year. As I said earlier on, the winter barley harvest had started probably in most areas, not everywhere, but in most areas around the first week of July, which is probably 10 days to a fortnight earlier than what you would like. So there was probably arguably a 2 week window there where the grain could have filled slightly more. But on top of that, what probably was the biggest factor, and you're probably right in saying that crops could have very low moisture. So those long, dry July days, crops dry down very, very quickly. So you might have had a crop that you might have thought was 20% moisture today, but it might have been 15% or even lower tomorrow. So I know certainly of some cases where barley was cut as low as 12% moisture. So you are certainly losing potential yield because you're not paid for that loss of moisture between 15 and 12%. So there was certainly yield loss because guys didn't get to harvest it in time.
Okay. Ciarán, just turning back to another major crop, which is oats. And it yielded quite well this year, but demand was, I suppose you could describe it as poor to being terrible altogether, with some people actually being turned away from merchants. How would you assess it over the year?
Sure, it's a very difficult one. There's two things to say about oats. Firstly, I suppose the area did increase this year slightly. We 34,000 hectares between winter and spring. It was 30 the previous year. Sometimes it'll be a little bit lower than that. Maybe that's a factor. Looking at ear to the ground last night and to see, sheds of oats with no home is, is very disappointing because it's a crop that we grow very, very well. It's very suitable for our land, and we're getting really, really good yields. We saw really good yields of winter oats this year, an average of 9 tons per hectare. Spring oats was 7.5, but I know in my own side of the world down in Cork, there was lads cutting 3.5 tons per acre of spring oats. So it's just a really suitable crop for our climate. I suppose just on the volume, but look, it's as I said, it's disappointing. I mean, there's the feed value of oats. We know from trials in Grange and finishing cattle is comparable to roll barley. So there's no difficulty in terms of feed value, and it's very good value, per ton at the moment as well. Albeit, look, and obviously there are difficulties in handling it in cubes and stuff like that. You have to acknowledge that it's not simple for the mills, but I mean, you would hope that over time there would be more markets or more development in markets for oats, because it's a very valuable break crop, and it's a crop that we can get very good yields of.
Yeah, it's vital for the industry, I suppose, that it's in there. And I suppose thinking about that in terms of one of our major crops, the likes of spring barley, it's noted in the crop that it fell by about 17%. What was driving the move more back towards winter cereals, Ciarán, in 2025?
Well, look, I suppose simply put, once the area of winter cereals goes up, your area of spring cereals goes down, and obviously our spring cereals is completely dominated really with spring barley, 115,000 hectares there last year. So look, that was down from 138 the previous year when you didn't have winter cereals in the ground. So I think that the area just fluctuates. I suppose, in terms of margins, unfortunately, spring feed barley, is a very low margin crop, and it is one that you'd like to see keep the area of it down, and maybe, like to be growing other crops that are going to give a better margin. But anyway, as I say, look, the area fluctuates. In terms of the year for spring barley, I suppose, look, it was quite good. I think the average yield was 7.3 tons per hectare, just short of that kind of 3 tons. And in fairness to spring barley yields, we are getting better yields now, and there is a little incremental increase there year by year, which is positive. Disease wise, very easy to manage it this year. A big factor, the drier weather. In terms of BYDV, it wasn't really an issue. Now, there was some isolated cases of late season BYDV that happened in Tipperary and in bits of Waterford and Cork as well, and that's something that we're looking at. But look, overall, you'd be very satisfied with spring barley yield this year.
Yeah, it was a good year for it. Shay, turning to some of the other crops that Ciarán mentioned a second ago, oilseed rape, the area of that dropped pretty sharply. What was the main reason for that decline? And also, I mean, after that, you might talk about the yield. I think it was really good yield out of winter oilseed rape this year.
Yeah, you're right, Michael. Oilseed rape fell from about 15 odd thousand hectares in 2020, harvest 2024, down to about a little over 11,000 hectares this year, which is a 25% decrease. The main reason for that, I suppose, is we have to go back to the harvest of 2024. It was a late harvest, so there was a lot of combines rolling, say, late August, early September in 2024. So it's simply down to time. People just didn't get time to get off combines and drill oilseed rape. And that's probably the main reason why the area reduced in 2025 or for harvest 2025. When we look at yield, I suppose that's probably one of the highlights of the harvest of 2025 is the yield of oilseed rape. We're looking at about somewhere an average of about 5 tons a hectare, which is probably one of the highest we've ever had. And couple that then on top of good prices for oilseed rape at the moment, or certainly at harvest time, it probably was the star performer for anybody who grew oilseed rape in 2025. And that contrasts with spring barley, as Ciarán mentioned already, which is probably at the other end of the scale, probably one of the worst margin crops that we're growing at the moment, albeit it's our biggest crop. So I suppose from that point of view, people were generally happy with oilseed rape the way it turned out.
And in a similar vein, with another break crop there, Shay, spring beans, that fell quite dramatically there, 23%. What was the reason for that?
Again, Michael, the main reason for that, it was a drop of about 4,000 hectares, which again is almost 25% again in total for that crop, is the area of winter cereals that were planted. So last September, October, people just got on drills and stayed drilling. And as Ciarán said earlier on, there's a kind of a compensation. Then when you grow all those winter cereals, it comes at the cost of spring crops, and spring beans was one of the casualties in that. Albeit, I suppose, look at again, the yield of it this year was probably relatively good at 5.1, so it's probably an average year for beans, and plus the protein aid as well. It helps to make the margin of that crop actually quite strong in comparison to cereal crops.
Was the yield, Shay, a little disappointing considering there was really good yields of cereal crops out there?
Yeah, and I suppose this is something, Michael, that people need to be aware of. For sure, I would have thought that beans probably should have been a little bit better. But again, I suppose we have to look back at the conditions during summer. And certainly beans are a crop, especially on the lighter land, or relatively light land, that do not like drought. And certainly we had experienced two droughts during the season. And I think that's something that really did affect the yields of beans, probably more than most other crops. Over the summer, and I think that's something we would have seen at the harvest. We would have hoped for maybe an extra, maybe quarter or half a ton, I suppose, if we're being greedy, but they just weren't there.
Ciarán, turning to back into a new crop that's been included into Harvest Report this year, rye. How would you assess rye at the moment in an Irish context, in terms of the yield this year and how people are viewing it going forward?
Yeah, it's a developing crop, and I suppose I did speak about low margins from feed barley there a while ago, and I think rye has a great place there in rotations, in the sense that, if a very, maybe a way of saying it would be sort of winter barley costs with winter wheat yields, so your cost per ton is lower. Average yields this year were about 10.3. Which is quite good, given that rye is generally grown in that sort of take-all slot, maybe similar to that slot that winter barley would be in, and I suppose that's kind of the slot for it. The area is increasing. We're up to, I think, almost 4,000 hectares this year, 3,700 maybe. Prediction is that that's going to increase. There's a good bit of rye in the ground this year, so we're talking about probably somewhere in the region of 5,000 hectares or a little bit more. So, it is, farmers are recognizing the value of rye. There's a lot of research done in Teagasc Oak Park at this stage on rye, and we're on a solid footing with rye, I suppose, really is the thing with it.
A good feed crop for ruminants and pigs alike.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly has a place in diets again, so it's a good alternative for growers, I think.
And Ciarán, the other one, I suppose it's always, and you mentioned it earlier on, was straw. Lots of straw out there, but prices have eased back a bit.
They did ease back a little bit. Now, I suppose there's a couple of aspects to straw. Firstly, SIM is there, and look, that's a very valuable scheme to tillage farmers. It doesn't interfere with the market, because generally, look, it's oat and straw, would be number one going into it. You're seeing, rape straw and that going in as well. So I suppose that said, there are some larger growers who would like to put more straw into SIM. Certainly I think that 40 hectare limit is a bit of a barrier to some, and you would get more into it if that wasn't there. But overall, the straw market, look, while it was back a bit, I think, as I said earlier, I think the costs of saving straw this year were less, in the sense that, weather at harvest is a big factor. A lot of straw was baled and loaded off the field without getting wet and stuff, and there is a cost in all that reloading and turning straw and stuff like that. So that's a positive. I suppose some slightly disappointing one was this year we did see some imported straw, chopped straw, coming in from the likes of Spain. Apart from the whole biosecurity risk, which is a big issue for our industry, that's a big risk with that. But maybe on the flip side of that, look, maybe there are opportunities for us maybe to target some of those markets that's going in, that's chopped straw is going into, and maybe that's something for the future.
So describe that to me, Ciarán. The chopped straw is coming in big bales, chopped very finely, to what market?
To the best of my knowledge, into the feed market, so into diet wagons on dairy farms predominantly. I'm not an expert on dairy diets and that, but I believe that short length chopped straw is it is used in diet wagon, in TMRs, I suppose, really. So look, maybe that's something, that a market that's there for us maybe to exploit a little bit.
Maybe there's more value in straw than we think there is, so it's something maybe people should be looking at. Shay, I just want to end off with you just looking ahead, and again in the crop report there's an estimation of plantings out there at the moment for 2026. What are they looking like? Are they up or down?
Yeah, it's always a difficult one to assess, Michael, because again, talking to the guys in the industry, the seed trade industry, we're looking at seed sales, I suppose, at the moment. And the indications, I suppose, are at the moment that certainly crops like winter wheat and winter barley will be at least as big an area as they were last year. Oats, for obvious reasons, are going to be down because look at the market just is it's not there for them, and stores, as we've mentioned earlier on, are full with oats. So price that you can get for oats at the moment is quite low. So people have reacted in that regard. Areas of oilseed rape, probably again, it's going to be a knee-jerk reaction because the yields were good and harvest was done quite early. I would say oilseed rape area is going to be up, and as Ciarán's already mentioned, that rye is up as well. The one thing I suppose, Michael, I'd just be wary of, and I've heard quite a bit about it this year that I haven't heard in the last couple of years, and that's the area of second wheats going in. So in that take-all slot. And I think it's just something that people need to be aware of, that there seems to be quite a bit of wheat planted back after wheat again, which is not new, but it's something that hasn't been done in quite a while. Certainly, I don't know about Ciarán, but I was getting a lot of queries again about latitude dress wheat and all that type of thing. So that seems to be a trend, not a trend. It seems to be a something that's out in the market this year, and it's just something that people need to be aware of as we go in through the spring of next year.
Okay, listen, thanks very much, guys. It's a great roundup of that, and that crop report is available on or the harvest report, I should say, is available on the Teagasc crop report for anybody who wants to access it there. So again, Shay and Ciarán, thanks very much.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
So that's it for today, and my thanks to Shay and Ciarán for joining me on the podcast. So as always, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.